Good morning.
Good morning.
It's good to see everybody this morning. This morning, Dad is going to be addressing the danger to our faith that develops when we allow self-pity to dominate our minds. Many people, perhaps some of us, maybe even me, tend to believe the world is unfair, and the only thing preventing us from enjoying life is the unfair nature of our existence. What makes this tendency to feel sorry for ourselves so insidious is this. It's a sign of two things. It indicates a deeply unhappy present moment, as well as it indicates that this unhappiness is likely to continue into the future moment. This will plague our lives until we choose to do something about it. So how do we become entrapped in this morass of self-pity? It all begins with self-doubt. When we fail to believe in our own possibilities, we will never reach our full potential. And by not achieving the success we think we deserve, we begin to experience the pain of regret, shame, and guilt. Consider this. Suppose, accidentally, that we touch a shovel. What do? We would pull our hand back because it's hot.
Stove. Not shovel.
Shovel. Stove.
Stove.
You know, if you really, I really have read this like 5 or 6 times. I went back there in the back and I read it to myself out loud. Okay, moving on now. It's because we human beings automatically flee from the presence of physical pain. So you guys know that all day long that I am going to really ridicule myself about calling it a shovel versus a stove. The same is true of psychological pain. At least we can laugh about it. It's often painful to admit that we are not successful or happy in life. And I have to tell you that oftentimes it's something I struggle with. This is the case because we know we have either done the wrong things in life or we have failed to do the right things in life. So rather than feel the pain of that admission, we cover this up by denying responsibility and by assigning blame for our misery to situations outside ourselves. This is the essence of self-pity. It is an attempt to avoid psychological pain. So by feeling sorry for ourselves, we cover things up, which is a form of self-deception. So how do we crawl out of this self-pity and get on with the rest of our lives? That will be the subject of what Dad is going to be talking about this morning, and he's going to be using the prophet Elijah as an example.
Thank you, Deacon. Let me ask you this question, okay? When you get up in the morning, do you rise and shine, or do you rise and whine? If you are a riser and a whiner, I can tell you this right now. You feel sorry for yourself. But don't feel like you're all alone. Some of the greatest people who have ever lived have fallen into this morass of self-pity. And as Deke said, one of those persons who fell into this trap is a man whose name was Elijah. Elijah the prophet from Tishbe. Now, you may be thinking this morning, oh, here he goes again, preaching about some guy that lived 3 millennia ago. Last week it was Joshua. This week it's Elijah. What's all of that got to do with me? Well, my challenge for today is to help you see what this means to you, to let you see how this man's life affects your life. I want to show you what the story of Elijah has to do with you individually on a personal level. How this man who lived so long ago can impact everything about your life. You see, the truth is this. Elijah lived in a world that was a whole lot like our world. It was difficult to succeed in the world of Elijah's day, and especially it was hard to succeed if you were a godly man or a godly woman. In fact, in the time of Elijah like today, godly people on the whole were despised. Some of them were even put to death. Sinful living was popular. The more wicked people became, the better they liked it. No one wanted to be told what to do. Everybody wanted to do their own thing. Sexual immorality could be found on every street in Israel at the time. And that tied in with idolatry. The idol of choice at that time was, of course, the storm god, that fertility god known as Baal. Now, idols of Baal were being worshipped in almost every home, in almost every place of business. There were high places to Baal located on every hill in the land of Israel. It was just rampant. Now, this is the way this idol was worshipped. It was by the practice of something called cultic prostitution. And in addition to rampant sexual practices, crime was everywhere. Crime was taking over the streets of the cities, towns, and villages of Israel. And you know, the two go hand in hand. You start worshiping material things, and the next thing you know, you see the increase of crime, because the greatest value is set upon having this or having that or having the other. And if you can't afford it, you take it. Now, the breakdown of moral virtue results in a breakdown of society as a whole, and especially a breakdown in respect for law and order. And then there was the economic situation. Poverty, honestly, when I talk about poverty, I'm talking about real poverty, abounded everywhere in Israel. And the poor every day were growing poorer, while the rich were growing richer. The poor were being ignored and even mistreated. But most of all, the faith of the children of Israel was being undermined. So this man, Elijah, decided that he would do something about the situation. He was tired of standing around doing nothing. So he decided to stand up and be counted, even if he had to do it alone. You know, the famous British statesman, the great Edmund Burke, once said this: all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Think about it. All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And that is true. It was true in the time of Elijah, and it's still true today. Well, let me tell you about Elijah. Elijah was a very good man, so he decided to do something to prevent the triumph of evil in this country he loved, in this place where he was raised. He decided to confront the problem at its very core. Now, what was the problem? Well, the problem germinated with the king of Israel, a man known as Ahab ben Omri. But most of all, it germinated with his wife, a woman known as Jezebel of Tyre. Now let me repeat this. This man Ahab was evil. But this woman Jezebel was a real piece of work. She was abjectly evil. I mean, this woman was evil incarnate. Get out your phone, look up evil, you'll see her picture. In fact, she was the one who had ordered the importation of thousands of Baalite idols, as well as hundreds of false prophets. And she was more than well aware that each of these idols and each of these prophets were an affront to Yahweh, the one true God of Israel. Elijah, on the other hand, was totally committed to the God of Israel. And he was totally committed to the people of Israel. And he believed, and rightly so, that the practice of idolatry was destroying the moral fabric of his nation. And he was right. It was doing that and more. Idolatry was stealing the people's birthrights by stealing the people's blessings. Now, the truth is this. Every man in Israel should have stood up and been counted. But by all appearances, no one did. And why not? Well, the answer is quite simple. They were afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid of Jezebel. Afraid of her power. Afraid of what she would do to them. So as I said, Elijah chose to take a stand, even if it meant standing alone, and even if it meant that Jezebel might take his life. And beloved, the people of God have to take stands occasionally. We can't just come and attend church and think that eliminates all of our responsibilities. Chrissy, I appreciate the fact that you get involved in things that make a difference. It's time Christian people do that. We've got to be involved. You see, the truth is this. People were letting fear dominate them. Now, this was what Elijah did. He looked around. He found no one else. Just him. But he decided somebody had to do something. In fact, what he did was this. He put out a challenge. He challenged 450 of Jezebel's prophets to a contest, one that would prove who really is God. Was the one true God Baal of the Canaanites, or was the one true God Yahweh of the Israelites? He was going to put out a challenge to prove who was truly God. So he issued this challenge, and guess what? The prophets of Baal took him up on the challenge. They all gathered in a lovely place in Israel. You were there in February, right? Mount Carmel. You stood at the very place where this whole story happened. Means a lot more to you now, doesn't it? You can see the top of that beautiful mountain. You can see that valley of Megiddo laying out in front of you. Well, Elijah says, okay, here's my challenge. Let's construct 2 altars of stone. I'll build one over here. You build one over there. This one is for Baal. This one is for Yah. Then let's take a bullock. Each one of us will take a bullock. We will dress it, prepare it, and we will place it on the altar. And then what we will do is this. Once the sacrifices are in place, each one of us at a given time will call for lightning to fall from heaven and devour this sacrifice. And the one upon which the lightning falls will be declared to be the one true God, the God of Israel. Well, first, the prophets of Baal erected their altar. They placed their sacrifice on it. And as the sun rose in the east, about 6 o'clock in the morning, these prophets of Baal began to call upon their God to hear and to act. They asked him to send lightning out of heaven. After all, he was the God of the storm. You see pictures of Baal. Where do you find him? Riding in a chariot upon the storm clouds. This was the God who sent rain to the earth. The prophets of Baal have an advantage, right? They pray. They call out. When nothing happens by 9 o'clock, they pick up rocks and they start cutting themselves. And they go into fits and they do the whole thing. And by noon, nothing's happened. Nothing's happened. No lightning. So they continue to petition Baal. They beg him to act, to come down from heaven. And they continued petitioning this way till 3 o'clock in the afternoon, all the while cutting themselves with stones. So when at 3 o'clock nothing has happened, they say, and of course, Elijah was a lot like me. He kind of got a kick sometimes out of things. So he said to him, he said, hey, this God of yours, and I'm quoting directly from the scripture, he may be on vacation. And then, just to add a little sting to it, he said, maybe he's relieving himself. Now, I don't have to explain that. Well, that's an awful long 9 hours. But Elijah's just having more fun out of this. And so finally, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he just decides, hey, that's enough. The prophets of Baal do. And they back away. Well, Elijah, he steps up. He says, okay, guys, my altar, dig a trench, a deep trench, all the way around it. Dig a trench. Bring me 12 barrels of water. So they bring the water. And he dumps it on the sacrifice until the scripture says the sacrifice was sodden. And it was wet. The ditch around the altar was filled up with water. And then Elijah cried out. And here is what he said in 1 Kings 18:36. Look at the screen. And it came to pass at the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, that's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that Elijah the prophet came near and said, Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. In other words, God, I'm throwing it all on you. You got a problem. I'm your man. I came up here. I did what I was told. Now it's up to you to take care of this situation. No sooner than he got these words out of his mouth than wham! Lightning comes down, and I'm telling you, it consumes everything. The sacrifice is gone. The altar is gone. The water in the ditch is gone. I mean, God has consumed everything in sight. Well, obviously, the contest was over, right? Yahweh of Sinai was God. Well, as you can imagine, this was an awesome spiritual victory for God's prophet. Unfortunately, God's prophets sometimes make wrong assumptions. Frequently make wrong assumptions. Unfortunately, Elijah made one too. You see, what he assumed was this. He assumed that once Yahweh had demonstrated his power, that all of Israel would rise up. They would drive out Ahab, drive out Jezebel, send her back to Tyre, where she belonged. They would rise up en masse and take care, and Israel would be restored as the people of Yahweh. A new godly king could be placed on the throne, and all the idols of Baal would be destroyed, and a new day would dawn in Israel. But I'm sad to say, that's not what happened. That's what I expect to happen. I understand his false assumption. I would have assumed the same thing. Look, God has demonstrated his power in so mighty a way. Everybody look. But instead of dethroning the king and queen, guess what happened? The queen rose up and she put a bounty on the head of Elijah. So what did Elijah do? March into the palace and say, look here, sister, I'm fixing to slap you silly. Now, I'd like to report to you that that's what he did, but he didn't. You know what he did instead? He fled for his life. And a couple of days later, we find him south of the town of Beersheba. Now, Mount Carmel is way up here. Beersheba's way down here. They're about 50 miles, 60 miles apart. I mean, a couple of days, he's made pretty good tracks because he's on foot. Well, what he does is he gets tired after he passes through Beersheba, and he lays down under a juniper tree. And what does he do when he gets under the tree? Well, he starts praying. Well, that sounds good, doesn't it? I think he should pray, but I must warn you, I don't recommend his prayer. I don't think this is a prayer you should pray. If you're ever tempted to pray this prayer, get that out of your head. Now listen to what he says, 1 Kings 19:4. Look at the screen. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. That's what they call a juniper tree today. And he prayed that he might die. Oh, God, just kill me. Oh, things are so bad, and they're going to get worse. Huh? Ever prayed that prayer? And he prayed that he might die, and he said, it's enough. I've had it. See, that's enough. Today we don't say, it's enough. We just say, I've had it. Now, Lord, take my life, because I'm no better than my father's. Now, beloved, I must warn you, it pays to be careful what you ask God to do. He just might do it. Now, in Elijah's case, I know he didn't really mean what he prayed. Thank God God understood that too. Because, you see, if he really wanted to die, all he had to do was turn himself over to Jezebel. She'd have taken care of it right there on the spot. So what was really going on under that juniper tree? What's really happening under the juniper tree? Well, it's actually quite simple. Elijah was having a pity party. He was feeling, oh, so sorry for himself. He felt like a failure. And his next statement proves it. He says to God, it's enough. Which actually means I'm through, I'm finished, I'm done, I'm cooked. You see, the circumstances of his life were not going like he thought they would and should. He thought that when he stood against Ahab and Jezebel and all the prophets of Baal, that all Israel would turn to him. But the events didn't unfold that way, and they rarely do. You know, beloved, when you do the right thing, have you ever noticed it seldom makes you popular? More often than not, we experience rejection, and the first tendency we experience is to feel sorry for ourselves and run and hide under some juniper bush somewhere. Well, no one goes anywhere or does anything substantive in life laying under a juniper tree. I can tell you that right now. Self-pity, feeling sorry for ourselves, will not bring us success in life. In fact, all it will do is impede our success in life. If you do the right thing the right way, I can assure you, you'll make enemies. If you work hard and you show more incentive, if you dare to be the best, then the Ahabs and the Jezebels of this world will try to put you down. You see, you and I live in an age, and we labor in a workplace that is absolutely addicted to mediocrity. Creativity, determination, productivity are frowned upon. In almost any endeavor today, a quest for greatness is met with ridicule and scorn. But here's the key. God has invested each of us with all the gifts and abilities we require to succeed in life. In fact, you and I are tailor-made to achieve greatness. God designed us for greatness. God actually designed us to succeed and not to fail. But success in the eyes of God is not always what the world sees as success. You see, in God's world, our success can be measured by asking ourselves one question. You ready? Success in God's world comes from how we answer the question, did I do what was right? Not did I do what was popular. Not did I do what was politically correct, but did I do what was right? And doing the right thing is difficult today because we live in a relativistic age where there are no absolutes to guide us. We live in an age where rightness and wrongness depends upon how we feel about it. And to add to our dilemma, those of us who dare to accept absolutes are looked upon as being intolerant and narrow-minded. Well, my point is this. Elijah should have expected this reaction, but he didn't. So he ended up under a juniper tree, feeling sorry for himself, terrified of what was going to happen to him, insecure, full of self-doubt, self-loathing. I'm going to give you something for free this morning. I'm not even going to charge you for it. I want to tell you something I've discovered about life in 72 years. Only one person can determine how you will face the future. And that person is you. That person is me. You see, the temptation to seek the safe way, to avoid taking risks, to give up on our dreams, forever surrounds us. And the difference between successful people and failures is this. Successful people keep their faith in God alive and their faith in themselves vibrant. Any of you remember Dynamite Danny? Danny Williams? I used to get up to go to seminary in the morning. Larry, I used to drive those roads out there where you were. Thank God I never met you face to face. Because you'd have had to have stuck me. But Dynamite Danny, I'd get up in the morning to go to school, and he would come on WKY on the radio, remember? And just about the time I would arrive for school, he was going off the air, and he'd say this. He said, I love God, and I love myself. I'm traveling east. I love you. Pass it on. Every day that would be an encouragement. I believe in God, and I believe in myself. Wow. Hard to put down again. No wonder he was called Dynamite Danny. That's pretty dynamite stuff. You see, successful people keep their faith in God alive and their faith in themselves vibrant. But the approach we choose to take is up to us. We can and we must control the way we think. No one else can think for us. Not only that, we must also control our emotions and our attitudes. Now, here's what we have to do at times. We have to detach ourselves from our circumstances and look at them from a distance. Don't respond to everything that's in your face. You do, you'll mess up your life. Back away from it. Get a distance from it so that you can look at it objectively in the whole scheme of things. Look at it from a distance. That's what God had to do with Elijah. He took him off deep into the Sinai desert, to Mount Sinai itself. Had him go up to a cave on the top of the mountain. I've been in that cave a number of times. It's quite a place. And there God took him to the mouth of the cave and had him look out. I can see that valley now as it lays down there. And through that valley first there came an enormous tornado, a windstorm, tore everything in sight to pieces. And Elijah said, now there's God. That's how God acts. But God wasn't in the windstorm. And then all of a sudden, a consuming fire roared through that valley, destroying every bush. He said, surely that's where God is. That's how God acts. He does things in great ways and demonstrates himself. You see, he'd been spoiled by the lightning. He thought that's the way God was always going to do things. But God wasn't in the fire. And then there was a 7-point earthquake. Shook the mountain. Elijah said, oh, that's it. God's in that. God wasn't in that either. God wasn't in the windstorm, the fire, or the earthquake. And then, all of a sudden, Elijah hears something in his ear. It's a still small voice. God spoke to him from where? From his own inner self. A still small voice told Elijah that no matter how things looked, he was not alone. Now, Elijah thought he was alone, especially in his willingness to stand for God, but that was not the case. As a matter of fact, after God had whispered to him, God told him, I have 10,000 others who have not bowed their knee to the Baal. You're not alone. You may feel alone, but you're not alone. I always preserve for myself a remnant. Beloved, this is what I found in my life. It is only when I look at my circumstances from a detached point of view that I begin to see the positive aspects of the negative circumstances that I faced. If I won't get in the face of those circumstances and let them dominate me, if I'll back off and look at them, I'll begin to see that something is in those circumstances that I need for my life. So let me share something I've learned to do when I face a major problem. I ask myself 4 questions. First, does it threaten my relationship with God? If it doesn't, it's not important. 2, does it threaten the security of my family? If it doesn't, it's not worth my effort. Thirdly, does it threaten my life? If it doesn't, it's not important. Fourthly, and here's the big one, how important will this be to me 10 years from now? So many of the things that I thought were hinge moments in my life, 10 years later, I didn't even remember them. In closing, there's one thing I want to emphasize. We must realize there are no failures on the road to success. There are merely a series of successive steps that must be taken and detours that must be maneuvered. The road of life will have detours, I promise you. It won't go the way you thought it would go. Failure is the term that negative thinkers attach to those detours. You see, just as a stranger is a friend you have yet to make, failure is a success you have yet to achieve. So just keep going. Don't give up. Don't quit. And finally, remember this. There it is. The Bible says this. As a person thinks in the deepest part of himself, in other words, those things that you think that you really let take hold in your life, those things determine who you are. As a person thinks in his heart, so is he. Change your focus. Change your focus from what you lack to what you have. Change your focus from the way things are to the way you will make them become. Change your focus from the person you are to the person you plan to become. Change your focus from the problems facing you to their possible solutions. And change your focus from the difficulties you're mired in to the opportunities they offer you. So, since we become what we think, how threatening is that to you? Since we become what we think, it is essential in life that we focus on God's abilities and get our focus off of our inabilities. Because with God, all things are possible. And that's my teaching for today.